Hello, and welcome to Getting to Your Big Story, expert advice from a writer who found their voice on Medium. It's really great to see everyone in the chat chiming in from all around the world. I'm Harris on the creator support team at Medium. I'm here with my wonderful colleague, Amy. Sharon.
Hi, I also work on the creator support team at Medium. So happy to see you all here from all over.
Yeah, California, Macedonia.
Right?
Mexico. Yeah, so Julio Vincent Gambuto is here with us and he'll join us very shortly. Amy and I just wanted to share a few remarks up top. And before we get to that, actually a few housekeeping notes. So before we get started, we are going to close the chat just so we can focus on the workshop. We'll have a Q&A later on in the workshop, so feel free to drop any questions that you have in the Q&A box as we go along. And my colleagues, Miranda, Carly, and Elvina are hanging out in the background, so you may see them floating around the Q&A, and they'll be monitoring that space. And this workshop will be recorded. We'll share a recording of the workshop in Creators Hub, which is our publication on Medium for writers. And we'll also share a transcript of the interview with Julio when we get that sort of sorted after the interview. So before we get into the discussion, Amy and I just wanted to share a bit about what we mean by a big story. So that's in the title of the workshop. What does a big story mean? And what does it mean on Medium in particular? When you hear the word big story, when you hear the term big story, you probably think of a story that went viral, although that term means a lot of different things these days, a story that reached a lot of readers. And we want to sort of underscore that it's less about the size of the audience and more about the quality of your audience. So when we think about a big story, we're thinking about a story that is helping people change the way they think about the world, a story that makes people feel things, a story that really gets people to engage with you and your ideas. So what is a big story? A big story can start a conversation. It can get people talking. A big story can coin a new term or articulate something unspoken, something that people have been thinking, but no one has actually said out loud. A big story can take a calculated risk. So maybe you're saying something that you're not sure everyone will agree with, but you really believe in it. And that can lead to a big story that people will really resonate with. And a big story has a crystal clear message. Even if there's nuance, you as a writer have done the work of making that nuance comprehensible to a reader. So that's a little bit about what we mean by a big story. Again, it's not as much about the size of your audience as the quality of that audience and how engaged they are with your ideas. How can you tell when a story might become big? So Amy and I were talking about this yesterday, and this is sort of drawn from our personal experience writing stories that sometimes resonate with a lot of people or resonate really highly with a small group of people. One is you're genuinely excited to share it, maybe even a little nervous. This goes back to the point about taking a calculated risk. So maybe you're saying something that you're not sure everyone will agree with, but you believe in it, and it's maybe making you a combination of excited and nervous. That's a really good sign. You know exactly what you've said and you believe in it. So you've crafted your argument really well, really intentionally. You've crafted your story well. And you've made a connection that relates to the zeitgeist and it feels surprising or interesting, even or especially to yourself. So I think this one's maybe the most important. If you're surprising yourself as you write, that's a sign that you're onto something and that what you're writing might resonate with a lot of people. And you felt something while you were writing it. Maybe you felt, and Julio and Amy, I think we'll talk about this a little bit later, but maybe you felt angry, maybe you felt frustrated, maybe you were laughing while you were writing it. Those are all signs that you're onto something and you're not posting just to post, but you're posting because you genuinely believe in your story. And that's a story that might be big in terms of resonating really deeply with people. And we have a few examples. I know that was a lot of talking sort of quickly, but we have some examples and I'll pass it to Amy.
We just have so much to say. There's so many stories on Medium we're excited about too. It was hard to just pick a couple, but here are a couple stories that we thought of as being, a writer's big story. There's the stories that start conversations. This this piece, Laziness Does Not Exist by Devin Price, has gone viral on Medium many times over. As you can see, it's from 2018. But Devin is a social psychologist, a professor, someone who writes a lot about being autistic, and wrote just a really, they have this really compelling headline. It's a really surprising idea. And yet, as soon as you start reading the post, it clicks into place. You know, they're talking about how what can be seen as laziness actually might just be about a barrier that the person has that you can't see, whether it's socioeconomic, they're neurodivergent, something. And it was such an interesting, surprising yet true idea. As soon as you start reading this article, you think, oh, right, yeah. It became a book. Devin turned it into a book. They've written another book on kind of a similar topic since then. Which I think is an interesting part of sort of the big story. Whether or not this story had gone super, super viral, it's crystallized something that to Devin was really important to write about. And that story is still on Medium. I think we're gonna share a link in the chat so you can read it if you want.
Yeah, I love that story. And another thing about it is they're taking a concept that people know or think they know, laziness, and sort of debunking it or sharing sort of like another perspective on it that you hadn't heard before. And I think that's another way to make your story resonate and to sort of think about when you're framing your story. Other stories coin new terms, as we were discussing. So maybe you've heard of the term geriatric millennial. It's sort of a spicy, a little somewhat provocative term that was going around Twitter last year, and probably still, definitely still going around Twitter. And it was coined by Erica Dewan, who is a book author who wrote this article on Medium, Why the Hybrid Workforce of the Future Depends on the Geriatric Millennial. And so geriatric millennial was a term that she had heard in conversation with her friends. And she wrote this article about why the term felt really apt to her. It did well on Medium, but it did especially well on Twitter, where people latched onto that term and were using it to describe themselves, to talk about their generation, to talk about being in their late 30s, early 40s. And I think this is maybe one of the most powerful things that a writer can do, is take a concept that everybody recognized existed. And there have been words for this generation, this micro generation in the past. People are calling it Xennials, people were calling them elder millennials, but no one had given it, like really crystallized it in this like sort of spicy and provocative term of geriatric millennial. And it gave people license to use that language to define themselves, to sort of push back against it, to reject it, or to embrace it. And I think that is a real service to readers, I think, because you're giving them language that they can use to start discussions with people that they know. And that's a way to help your story resonate really widely and really deeply with people.
Yeah, then there's the story that does all of the above, like Julio Vincent Gambuto's story. Prepare for the ultimate gaslighting. Okay, let's see. I'm gonna drop a link in the chat to that piece in case you haven't read it. It was in the early days of the pandemic. Remember that? April 2020. This piece really quickly started just doing crazy traffic on and off Medium, over 21 million views. And some of the things that we think really sort of made this story, set the story apart, is it really crystallized the writer's angle and audience. It really articulated something unspoken. I remember reading this piece for the first time thinking, right, yes, that's what's I haven't been able to articulate, but it feels so true. It sparked a discussion. And then in Julio's life, it led to a book deal. It sort of changed his writing life. So we're going to invite Julio to join us and talk a little bit about what this experience has been like for him. Hey, Julio.
Hi, everybody. Hello from New York.
Hello. Well, thank you so much, writer-director Julio, for coming and joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I meant to say that before this piece, well, maybe you can talk a little bit about it, but you have a whole career as a film director and filmmaker too. and had written a lot, but didn't maybe necessarily think of yourself as a writer first and foremost before this piece came out. I'm telling you how you feel about yourself. This is also.
I appreciate, sometimes that's helpful for you to tell me how I feel about myself.
Like you thought you were great and doing great, but so maybe you can start by just telling us a little bit about the post, just for
Sure.
like 4 people in the world who haven't read it.
Sure. So first, hi everybody. Hello from New York City. It's so I mean I'm blown away by the locations that everyone's coming from on this call. So hello in Argentina and Brazil and Asia and Washington D.C. and California. This is a special coming together. Let's see, the piece was a surreal experience completely. I mean, I had written on Medium a number of times before, I think only about 6 or 7 pieces before. And originally I was kind of attracted to Medium because I liked the cleanliness of the space, and I liked that you could write something that felt like you were writing in a magazine, but you didn't kind of have to jump through the 19 hoops to get into a magazine, and it was immediate and you could link to it. So, so many of those pieces before kind of started as Facebook rants. And then I felt like, oh my God, I don't want to be that guy on Facebook. Let's move this over to Medium and make it more thoughtful and make it more polished. So I had written about Hillary Clinton during the presidential run, me and a million other people. I had written about local politics, Max Rose, who's a Democratic congressman who won my hometown district on Staten Island in New York City, was able to flip the district. So I did a lot of writing about that when I was living there. And then this moment came along where we were all trapped in our houses, and this happened about 4 to 5 weeks into the lockdown. So we've been at home, sort of at that first expiration moment where we were all exhausted and we were not sure how long this was going to last. And I had just moved into New York City proper, into Manhattan full time 3 weeks before the pandemic started. So I was just like in this new apartment by myself, alone, on full lockdown. And it was starting to get to me. And, at least here in New York City, and I know throughout the world, people knew people who were dying. And so that week, I think it was 5 people in kind of our larger orbit, friends of friends, friends of family, one cousin's father, another friend's husband had died within the prior week or 10 days. And so I went to bed the night before just totally overwhelmed and probably more depressed than I've ever been in my life. And I woke up the next morning and thought it was going to be a normal day and poured coffee, and I got this email from J. Crew. And it just was the spark that frankly kind of changed my writing and changed, a lot on my desk, but also kind of, was the spark for me I got so angry. And the reason was that like a week prior, every brand in America was sending out these huge emails. Like you got emails from brands you didn't even know you were on the list for. And everyone was just emailing about like how to clean your hands. And I mean, it was the most ridiculous thing. And so what I was bothered by was that, J. Crew and people like them and, brands like them had taken the time to care about me and you and all of us as consumers by telling us how to wash our hands. But then a week later, it just switched off and was like, now you can buy a sweater for 40% off. Mm-hmm. And it just enraged me. And so I went to Facebook, as was my habit, and I started writing something. And then I was like a paragraph or 2 into it. And I was like, you know what? This needs to be moved over to Medium. And I spent a few hours at my desk working on it and then posted it. And it was the craziest thing because it just started getting shared on Facebook. And people were saying, oh my God, you said what I wanted to say. And that's what I was thinking. And then I had never seen this happen, but sort of those share numbers went up on Facebook. And then suddenly it started to get shared around Medium. And then Forge picked it up. And so, an hour, 2 hours later, there were thousands and thousands of shares. But by that evening, it was at like 400,000 views, and then it kept going. And, that was Easter weekend. So by Saturday, it was at, 10 million, 12 million views. And then by Sunday, about 15, 16. So it was a very wild experience, but, one I'm super grateful for and humbled by and inspired by, and, very much understand that kind of can't be repeated intentionally, like I kind of have. So I'm really grateful for that moment. I got to communicate the deepest part of me from my laptop in my house alone,
And I love that, like, you didn't follow any of the writing advice or self-editing advice that like you would probably give students. I know you teach that I would tell anybody, like I would, never say, oh, don't have anyone else read it. Just post it right after you. Don't even reread it. Just post it after you write it. And then just, but sometimes that's how it happens. It's, because you didn't take that time to sort of maybe censor yourself or quiet it down or anything.
Yeah, it was raw. And I think that's kind of what made it what it was, or at least made it resonate the way that it did, because we were all raw in that moment. And I think if it were even more polished or edited or put through, a number of, committee editing or whatever, journals do things differently, magazines do things differently, Medium does things differently. I think it would have, in that particular moment, wound up being a different piece. So
yeah. So why, I know, you had been focusing more on filmmaking, and we've talked a little bit about how different for you, now you write on Medium a lot, how different the experience of writing something on Medium is than, say, filmmaking. Can you talk a little bit more about what that's been like?
Yeah, I mean, the practical day-to-day is that filmmaking was just on pause for almost 2 years. I mean, we all know friends and family, or have heard at least of people who work in the business who are back to work, and, or that movies and TV are still being made. And some of them even include a pandemic storyline. And so, the industry as a whole is back. But I work primarily in independent film, and that has been rocked to its core by the pandemic, by the economics, by the fallout, by the shifting economics of the movie business. So some people are back to work, some people are not back to work. We will shoot, I run a company called Borough 5. We will shoot our second feature film this year, if all goes well, by the end of this year. But that was about a 2-year delay from our original plan. So the point is, I had 2 years to kind of figure out, like, what am I doing day to day? How am I going to, communicate and express and be creative and be artistic and write and Medium, this kind of all happened at the exact same time. And it just became really clear that Medium was going to be my creative home, at least in the downtime, if not, for good, and certainly has now continued to be. But to your point and to your question, movies take time. They just take so long. Like, our first film is called Team Marco, and that was a family film. And it took 4 years from development, script writing, fundraising, production, post-production, getting it out and getting it on Hulu and all of that. I mean, that's a long process. So for someone who kind of gets up every day and has something to communicate or wants to connect, that's a really long process to do it in. And Medium has, been a really fantastic tool for me to be able to just like cut right to an audience and talk to them. And, I've done stand-up comedy before. I've gotten back up on stage recently again, because the audience is right there. And it just helps me to communicate ideas and to, laugh and entertain, and also, think and converse in a way that movies really don't let you do. Movies let you have like a big thesis and then spend an hour and a half sort of, creating a visual world to tell that statement or that message. But, writing in short format and writing in essay format, it's something I used to do when I was in my 20s and in college and in high school, and I've just fallen in love with it again. So.
Right. And it always occurs to me whenever I talk to someone who works in film, like, wow, you really need a lot of buy-in from a lot of people.
Yeah.
So many people
Totally.
have to agree.
And that's the thing
Not on
about
me.
this, like to your point about just like hitting send or posting it, it was like, I was exhausted by the buy-in. I was exhausted by having an entire production team and executive producers and having to, you don't necessarily have to get everyone's approval on every move, but it's a larger conversation all the time. So I think the thing that I was like most excited by and proud of, frankly, and fulfilled by, with this article and essay and all the work that's followed is like, it's just me in an apartment with my laptop communicating, so it kind of saves me the kind of larger song and dance that comes along with, making a bigger piece of art. So.
Yeah, I wonder if it makes that sort of more surreal too. Sometimes I have that feeling, when I've written something and then someone responds to it, and I think, wait, how do you know about that thought that I just had? Those things that I just made up in my head. It feels like so intimate, kind of. Answer this however you want to, but what lessons do you think medium creators can learn from your story's success?
Sure. It's a good question. I've thought about it, because lots of people have asked, which I think
I'm sure.
I know it's a great, thing to want to take away. The first thing is really to write from an emotional place. And I think a lot, people who are writers or want to be writers or who are in our kind of creative orbit always think that the word emotional means like someone needs to be crying or you need to be crying, or especially filmmakers think this, right? Like, is it an emotional movie or isn't? And I just mean from any place that hits or sparks any emotion, right? Happiness, joy, anger, resentment, disappointment, sadness, glee, like all of those things inspire something different in you. And I love to write from those moments because, especially with this piece, I was angry. I was disgusted. I was overwhelmed. I was exhausted. And I actually used some of those words in the piece. I said, dear reader, I imagine you're as devastated as I am right now at the state of the world. And I'm not saying that every piece needs to use that kind of language, but I am saying I think, pieces are more powerful when they come from an emotional place, and then are put through your talent at being elegant, in your word choices and structure and your craft. But if it comes as an emotional response, I think it's going to land for people. So, if you are moved by it, if you feel something from it, chances are the reader's going to as well.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like I know I'm onto something good when I have a sort of similar conversation with a couple different people, and you know what I mean? And it feels like everybody's talking about this thing. And when you have a moment in that conversation where you're both like, yeah, that's it. Mm-hmm. It's like, sometimes we feel like that's so distant from our writing lives, but really it's like you're in conversation with your reader.
Absolutely. And I like to even as because I put a piece up weekly now, and the thing I love to do is respond to something that's happened, like not necessarily the hottest news story or the most trending thing on Twitter, like that can feel so calculated, but at the same time, those are the things people are talking about. So if I've had a conversation with someone twice or three times or different people throughout the week, and then something happens sort of in the world of that conversation, mm-hmm. I like to respond to that thing. So, because it kind of anchors the piece a little bit in the moment and anchors the piece in an emotional response to that event, like Biden coming out and saying, you're going to get free COVID tests. Like the day he announced it, I wanted to write about it because I felt like, okay, everything I feel about the Biden administration right now is like coalescing around this thing or this event. Mm-hmm. So that's just for me a helpful way that I can, open up the laptop and write.
Yeah, I love that you say that too, because I think a lot of times, especially newer writers are worried about having something unique to say. Like, well, what's my story to tell? There's so many writers out there. What do I have to say? And to your point, sometimes, you really do want to be universal, or take part in a conversation and talk about what other people are talking about. And every person, just by virtue of being their own person in the world, is having a different experience of that and has something different to say about it.
Yeah,
absolutely. And that's really valuable advice. Shifting gears slightly, what does it feel like? This is the emotional part.
Shit.
No, yeah, get ready. No, to have a piece like this blow up so wildly, and then to write other things later that maybe don't do such big numbers. How do you make sense of that as a creator? Yeah. Does it feel frustrating, or like what?
I mean, it's a great question. I think for this particular piece, one of the reasons that it did what it did and went where it went was because of that particular moment in time. I mean, the entire world was at home right at that moment, 4 or 5 weeks in, and having that first experience of like, what is this? And so I do think that this particular piece for me was really kind of a once in a lifetime opportunity to speak to that many people. And, you know, I mean, Amy, you and I have talked about this informally, but like, I could make a movie tomorrow that goes around the world and it wouldn't reach that number of people. So this experience is so special to me for that reason. But there was almost sort of like a really bizarre, I don't want to take this word out of context, but it like, there's almost like it was very sacred, to be frank, like to know that you could, in that moment of devastation in the world, talk to people and have them read what you wrote. And it wasn't a tweet, it was a 2,000, 3,000 word essay. So it's like, I really felt honored that whether you agreed with what it was, the content of it, or you disagreed with the content of it, that people felt compelled to share it and that it resonated with them, and or that it at least started a conversation. And you know, for the rest of my career, I will always think about, oh my God, how do I get to 21 million? And you know, and so that from a day-to-day perspective, I just made a commitment to myself early on, like, that's it. That's not going to happen again. So just don't get up every day and go to Medium expecting that to happen again. And don't like sort of put your brain through and your heart through the like emotional, you know, warfare of like, but wait, only a certain amount of those people followed me and only a certain amount of those people responded and only a certain amount of people clapped. It's like, whoa, life is like too busy to get like in the weeds like that.
That's right.
Emotionally. But I do think about that a lot with respect to, oh wait, now I have to be like much more careful about what I write, or do I not? Or did people appreciate how raw it was? So, you know, it was followed up by 2 other essays that are part of the series. They did really well also, but not the same level. And so all of those questions start to come into your brain. But I try to do my best to put them aside and write in the moment for that week. And if 10 people read it this week, then they read it and are moved by it or want to talk about it, XYZ. If 100 people read it, that's great too. And try to contain my kind of emotional experience of it to just, you know, that week, that piece, that, you know, message. So.
That sounds very healthy. I'm glad that you're doing that.
easier said than done.
You made me think about a couple different things. What you were just saying. First of all, I love that you pointed out, I should have said this up top, your essay is really long. And it's, I mean, for Medium, and it's like a long read, it's 2,000-3,000 words. And something that I really love about sort of like your essay and the story of it is how it kind of doesn't follow any of the rules. You know, it's longer than you would probably, you know, I think we usually think of the optimal length for a piece on Medium being like maybe 800 words, something like that. It's sort of like bucked all the conventional wisdom, like there's no formula to it, which means maybe, you know, makes your life more difficult because there's no formula to repeat. But it's just, I think, so instructive that people really aren't looking for something dutiful or formulaic. They're looking for something like surprising and raw and from the heart. I think also you never talk down to your reader, which feels really important. Like you assume everyone reading it is smart and thinking and on top of things.
Thank you.
Which is like hard to do. It's hard to trust your reader sometimes as writers. So I think that's was part of the success of that piece.
Oh, I appreciate that. You know, Amy, I'm glad you said that. And I have such, great respect for anybody who is really going to take the time to read 2,000-3,000 words. But I do try in my writing, just as a kind of like technique or style, call it what you will, to kind of anticipate what people are thinking when they're reading it, to anticipate, like, I know you're thinking I'm crazy, or I know you're thinking, that's impossible, or, because I think as a writer, you have your internal critic, right? So even though your hands are typing something, part of your brain is going like, that sounds like bullshit, or that's not correct, or that's not, and so I think you can be writer and reader at the same time and anticipate some of those things. And I've found that those parts of, whether it's that essay or other work, people will come back to me and say, like, I love that you said X, because that's exactly what I was thinking in that moment. And then it kind of becomes a device where you can continually interest the reader to get through something that's long. So it's like you're not just going off on your own path for 3,000 words, but you're checking in with them along the way. And I don't know how much of that, I do intentionally or by design, but I've kind of learned over the last 1.5 or 2 years that is part of how I write, and that's an effective part of it.
Okay, it all makes sense to me now. I figured out why you were able to write this piece the way you did, because this whole time I've been like, how did you write it so fast and then just post it? And it made sense and was coherent. And I think it's because you've trained yourself as a writer to be thinking about the reader. So it's like, it wasn't like you had to go back and do another read and say, okay, does this make sense to the reader? Am I communicating? And maybe that has to do with your background, performing and doing film, like being thoughtful of the audience, because the audience is hard to ignore if you're on stage in front of them. Sometimes easy to forget about if you're writing on your laptop and you're like, everyone knows what I mean.
But I think really it's too, like, because we're trained, like in film school and in movie land, we're trained to keep attention throughout, because the media landscape is so fragmented and so overwhelming that no matter if it's a movie or a TikTok or a article, like, if you're not engaged, you're gone. So we are trained, as creators in the film world, to always be engaging and trying to make sure that you keep an audience's attention throughout. So I think that is probably part of the unconscious, drive to make sure that, people are still with me. Are you still there? So.
Yeah. And that's so true writing on Medium too. There's a lot of stuff on Medium to grab your attention. And it's true of any kind of writing. I think it was like Kurt Vonnegut or someone said, like the main rule of writing is use the time of a total stranger in a way that they won't feel like it's wasted. Like, you're asking a total stranger to take a break from everything on the internet. There's a lot on there. And read your piece. Like, you gotta give a lot. I'm curious. So it's really interesting to see. You've had a very unusual experience, and we should be clear that it's quite unique, how you've sort of spun this into kind of a whole writing life. Can you talk a little bit about how turning this kind of concept into a book proposal and now a book has been for you, and how it's been different than writing Medium posts, if it has been?
Yeah, sure. Well, the first thing I did after that moment, or the essay, as we call it in my house,
essay
is I just started writing regularly, right? I wanted to, make sure I was writing at least weekly. I wanted to make sure that if people were following, they could follow a consistent voice. And I've struggled with that. I've gone up and down. I live in New York City at a time that's very strange and out of the ordinary. So I really enjoy writing about New York in this moment. I like writing about happiness and boundaries and what it's like to kind of be a business professional in this moment as well, and how work has changed. So, I did definitely explore a lot, like after this piece came out, at least for that first summer, about kind of what was I going to do on Medium if I came to the platform once a week. I've kind of sort of settled on this crossroads between, you know, politics and the pandemic and personal essays and have really enjoyed it. So that was kind of the first thing for me, was like, okay, if there's an audience here, then I'm going to up my game and continue to talk to them. And so that was kind of the first step. And then after that, just for the story, you know, because the essay went and did what it did, I was approached by a literary agent to start to think about a book. And we talked about a lot of ideas, but the thing that was most sort of outstanding from that set was, you know, everyone in their comments to me, or I should say most people, said, okay, now what? Like, yeah, we see what's going on with consumerism. We see what's going on with capitalism. We understand where we are in this moment politically, but where do we go from here? And what do we do about it? So I really went into the book project thinking, okay, this book is the answer to now what? And that's kind of where the agent and I decided, like, yes, that's what the book is. And then we had to figure out, well, what are the other 250 pages, you know? So, and so, or what's in the 250 pages that answers
right. What
that
is the
question.
answer?
What is the answer, you know? So, yeah, so the last year of my life has really been about coming at the conversation from as many angles as possible in my writing and in my reading, and in understanding, you know, what the larger conversation is that we're having about late stage capitalism and where we are in America in 2022. And, you know, if I want to write something that's thoughtful and actually resonates, it's got to be as engaging as this piece was, and it's got to be as thought provoking as this piece was. And, you know, obviously that's a tall task, but one that I'm like super excited about. So the process was, we went through a year of redrafting that proposal. So a proposal for nonfiction, for those listening who don't know, it was about 150 pages. I mean, it's about you, it's about your background, it's about the target market for the book, it's about the target reader for the book, it's about what the book should do and what people should take away from it. It's about, you know, chapter breakdowns and chapter summaries, and then full chapters of the book. So it's a lengthy document, and because the book is so meant to be relevant to the moment, every time the moment changed, I had to redo these 150 pages. So, you know, like the summer of 2020 hit and the protests happened in New York, and then it took a different bent, and then Biden was elected, and then it took a different bent, and then the vaccine came out and it took a different bent. So, you know, like movies, books take long periods of time. And so you kind of have to anticipate what's ahead, or at least future proof it in a way where if it came out on a bookshelf, you know, a year from now, it would still make sense. And I kind of was in a mode of like, no, I want the book to come out like next week because I want the answer, you know. And the publisher or the agent was like, that's not how it works. You know?
So books are slow.
The books are slow. So I'm excited about that. And I'll continue, you know, to work on Medium and write on Medium. And then while I work on the book, but the book was picked up by Avid Reader Press at Simon & Schuster, and it'll be out in 2023. So that was an exciting process all its own. It's the first time I've done that process, and it was wonderful. But Avid was incredibly supportive and incredibly, it just sort of fit who they wanted to be who I wanted the book to be, what they do, right? Which is like smart, intellectual, but hip, but relatable, and it kind of just made sense. So I hope, knock on wood, it is all of those things. So
it will be. Come on, no sweat, and you're going to solve all the problems of late stage capitalism. Thanks so much for doing that.
You're welcome. Cheers.
Oh my God, yay! I have like 72,000 more questions, but I see that we have a lot of great questions coming in from the audience too. So Harris, do you want to share the slide? We have a slide of some sort of like takeaways. And he did it. Yay. That maybe, you know, are helpful to you at home all across the globe. And then, so Julio, if you want look in like our little chat box here. There's some questions
Sure.
for you. Just- yeah, just read the
Okay.
question so everybody knows. Up to you.
Oh, this is an interesting one. Okay. Well, I'll start with this one. How often do you write? Is there a certain number of articles you try to write per week or per month? Right now I'm writing once a week at least. If something strikes me, or I feel like something is super timely and it has to get out immediately, or I'm responding to something that just happened and I feel like I really have something to say about it, then I'll kind of turn that around faster and there'll be more per week. But my kind of, challenge is once a week. And then, that becomes kind of my time. I do it first thing in the morning. Other people work differently. I just find like my brain is just ready to write more in the morning, even sort of before, while I have coffee, but that's obviously just a style thing and different for everybody. So that's how often. As a fellow film student and director, I'd love to know what writing techniques you brought from your medium stories to script writing and vice versa. I love this question because I think about this all the time. So I teach screenwriting and story structure, and one of the things I teach is kind of fundamentals of story structure. And I think at this point it's kind of just like ingrained in my brain, and so I do it automatically, but at least in a script, for a feature film, it's got to be set somewhere. It's got to have a hero or a protagonist. That protagonist has to want something. There has to be an opposing force or a villain of some sort. There's a before and after. So there's a number of about 10 or 12 fundamentals that I teach and work with. I'm not the only one who teaches them, but to be clear, but I organize my class around them. And I think in my writing, especially in my medium writing now, I'm trying to challenge myself to use all of them. And maybe I did it sort of unconsciously before, but now I'm doing it more consciously, where I'm like, okay, like, who's the main character of this piece? What do they want? Who's in the way? Who's the opposing force? And then funny enough, I looked back at the gaslighting essay and I was like, oh, this is kind of clear like that. Like, we, the consumer, are the hero. The opposing force or the villain or brands and capitalism. And I think if I had sat down and kind of charted that out, it wouldn't have felt as organic. I don't think I did that kind of like, by methodology or by design, but looking back, like, they're all in there. So, it was interesting to reflect on it.
Yeah, I feel like it's a great argument for the value of just like reading a lot and writing a lot, and even writing stuff that maybe like isn't super polished and you don't end up publishing, because it's like it seems like you had the muscle memory for everything has to have a story, everything has to have a conflict, a plot, a hero, and so then sort of subconsciously everything you write kind of has some structure.
And I think like key to that, Amy, too, for like, especially for people who are beginner writers or starting to write more consistently, I think, the most important of all of that is that you're saying that you have a clear message, and that your piece kind of becomes the vehicle for that, but that you've got a clear message. And, it's interesting because sometimes I'll want to respond to something in the news, or I'll want to respond to something socially, or something that's on Twitter, or something I've heard, around the water cooler, quote unquote. And I'm like, oh yeah, like, great, I can write about this, but I don't have anything to say about it. Like, I don't, like, I don't have a, what you'd call like a take
More of a situation.
Like, like, I can talk about how everyone's talking about this, but I don't really have an opinion on it. I don't have a message that I want to communicate. And so I kind of run through that rubric in my head of like, okay, well, if you don't have a message, then don't write about it. It's just gonna be this like stream of consciousness, which has some value as well. But
sure. Yeah, there's
did I answer more
here. Yeah.
Okay. There was one there. Wait, I lost the other chat. Where am I? Okay.
I know.
Here we go. The screen is moving. Okay, cool. If the story was published a few weeks later because you were unsure about it, do you think it would have done as well? Oh, that's really interesting.
That is interesting.
because I know some of us tend to hold off on posting when we're nervous about it or feel vulnerable. Such a great question. Yeah, I don't think it would have done as well if it was posted a few weeks later. I think there was something particularly special about that weekend. It was Easter weekend. It was Passover weekend. And I think everyone was just kind of feeling like, oh my God, like, is this thing gonna affect these annual traditions? You know, like I'm supposed to go to my mom's house on Sunday, or we're supposed to go to temple, or we're supposed to, like, is this virus going to now affect real day-to-day, week-to-week, annual life? And so I think it was the right moment for it. So, you know, it's hard to answer the question. I mean, no, it's clear to answer the question. Yes, I do not think it would not have done as well.
Right.
Or no, I don't think it would have done as well a few weeks later. But I would encourage you not to hold off from posting when you're nervous. It's that same risk that you have to take, you know, as a stand-up comedian when you go out in front of the audience. And it's the same risk you have to take when you put a movie up in front of people who haven't seen it before, know nothing about it. And it's that same risk you have to take on a date to say, I like you. Like, it's the same, you have to leap. And if people know and feel that you leapt, then they'll leap with you. But if you're like, yeah, I'm not going to put this out there until I know that the water is totally warm, which frankly is how I've led a lot of my creative life. And I think it's gotten in the way because you know, there's always 100 things that can be fixed, and there's always 100 things that you could do differently, and there's always 100 things that are imperfect. And it's like, well, if I just polish them up the right way, then it'll be successful. And the truth is that, like, at least what I've learned from this experience is that that's not the case. And so, you know, Amy and Harris and I have talked about this informally as well, but, like, you know, the experience of this article or essay is made me so much more confident in my creative life, because I've realized that I was getting in my own way in many, many ways by putting every single project, every single step of every single project through that type A perfectionist mode, where it kind of just like loses its magic, you know?
Yeah, I think that's real. And maybe that's a little bit how you got to that place. Like, I love when you talk about this essay and sort of being like a sacred moment, because it's like that. It was really raw, it was really honest, you were really connecting with people. I do think also it's just fascinating that it happened like
it was
this amazing time of year.
Anyway,
but that right, it's like so often we have this inner critic and this sort of perfectionist streak that also sometimes is just, I think, like masked procrastination, you know, like if it's never perfect and you don't put it out there, then no one can ever tell you what's
and then no one can ever criticize you.
That's
and trust me, this piece was criticized. I got hate mail. I got I mean, I was really reachable online. Like, I got thousands and thousands of messages from all over the world. Many were very gracious, many were very respectful, many were not. And people really took the opportunity to say, not only don't I disagree with you, but fuck you. And so it was just a bit like, and you've got, I think, at some point to be able to say, like, okay, I'm going to put those in this inbox and read them a week from now, or I'm going to read them and not let them get to me, or I'm going to read a really good one and then a really bad one. Whatever your sort of personal technique is for like taking feedback, it's important, you know, and it's important to be able to do that. But that's also a muscle and a skin you kind of grow, you know.
It's hard. It strikes me again and again. It's like one of the hardest things about being a writer is that to write, you have to be really vulnerable and open and honest and sort of thin-skinned. And then the second your writing is out in the world, to take the feedback and to take people writing, you have to have a really thick skin. It's like a weird.
Like, we talk about this one on our first movie, and now on the second one we're talking about it, but like, I'm a highly emotional person. I'm a very open person. I'm a very, like, I say what's on my mind. I don't have a lot of filter. And like, those are not always the best qualities. Like at my desk with like other hats on, you know, like when I'm dealing with lawyers and accountants and like all the business end of things, like those are not the best qualities. But, you know, whenever someone calls me out on it, I'm like, look, those are the qualities that make me good at this other part of my life and I can't sacrifice them because I'm on the phone with 3 accountants and a lawyer. Like I have to be able to say what I say when I say it and things like that. Yeah, exactly. I have to defend all of us creatives. So.
That's my excuse when I lose things. It's too creative. I think we have time for a couple more questions.
Sure. Should I keep going?
Any that strike your fancy?
Yeah. So can you be more specific on how to write timeless while pointing to a moment in time? Medium suggests timeless writing instead of news writing, which is just for today's issues in today's publication. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think what I meant by my earlier comment is like, I like to write about things that are sort of like swirling around, like you've sort of talked about it on Twitter, or you talked about it with friends, or it came up in a phone call, or it's in a newspaper, but you know, I haven't yet formed an opinion about it. It's just kind of something that's in the world. And then an event happens that's timely. And I'm like, oh, I want to respond to that. So I do think it's important to like distinguish between what I do and what a journalist does, which those are 2 different crafts. So I would never purport to be a journalist, but it's an interesting, they have to be timely. Whereas I think essay writers get the privilege of reflection. And at the same time, you never want that emotion to like be dampened so much that what you're writing is not the best reflection of that emotion. So, to answer the question, timelessness is not necessarily about, this should hold up 5 years from now. But it's also, the opposite is true too. It's not about like, oh, if I read this tomorrow, it'll be stale. So there's this weird medium in the middle.
There's
this weird medium space in the middle. I think that's important. So
yeah, I think that's really, really true.
I love this question because hi Julio, were you ever worried about paragraph lengths? I've been drilled over and over about the importance of short paragraphs for online writing, e.g., 3 to 4 sentences max per paragraph. So I was inspired that your paragraphs are much longer, but your story is still riveting. What's your opinion on paragraph length on Medium? I totally have an opinion. Here it is. So I read a lot of pieces like, Tim Denning, who I love, writes in like 2 sentences space. Other people write where like you could scroll for 10 minutes and because it's just a sentence, three lines, a sentence, 3 lines, capital, a heading, 3. My own personal style is not that. I really do prefer paragraphs. And I prefer paragraphs because to me, the challenge of writing in paragraphs is that you make the thought coherent and that you link the thought from paragraph to paragraph in a coherent way. I'm more successful at it sometimes than I am others. Sometimes I'm not successful at it. But the point is, it's the writing challenge to kind of say like, oh, this was the point of this paragraph. And now that inspires the next paragraph. And this is the point of this paragraph. But to the question about the length of those, I do go more than 3 or 4 sentences. Usually it's about 4 or 5, depending on kind of the length of the sentence. But I just make sure that every paragraph is its own succinct point.
Right.
Like if I'm giving you the 3 reasons, well, I shouldn't say that because it sounds like a listicle. But if my argument in the piece is about the 3 reasons, you should live in New York City, then I'll give you a paragraph about each of those reasons. And then if there's a sub reason, then I'll give you its own paragraph. I always want every paragraph to just be its own thing so that if you read it independently, you could make sense of what I was saying. So.
Right. And I think that sort of explains why your pieces are very readable, even if the paragraphs are long, because each paragraph is a sustained thought.
But that's just a style thing. I mean, everyone's different. And did you have much of a Medium following, history, reputation prior to your viral article? How did it affect your performance after publishing the post? No, I had a small following. I had a much larger following on Facebook and a little bit on Instagram and Twitter, but nothing like Medium after the article or the essay. My sort of history creatively as a writer director, and I did a couple of magazine writing gigs 10 15 years ago, but this was kind of like a rebirth into short form. And how did it affect your performance? It just affected me because I felt like had to live up to, the number of views, or I had to live up to the conversation that had started. I took that to heart. And at the same time, I kind of had to balance that with like, I don't want to, be at home hemming and hawing for a week and a half and have to call, editors and a PR person to get approval about what I write, So it was a hard dance to do. And I still think I'm working it out, frankly. So.
Yeah, we have like 2 more minutes. Is there another
Okay.
question?
If not perfection and polish, are there any reasons you would withhold to wait to publish? Any cautions? If you're mentioning someone by name or this is interesting. I read a lot about my family in other realms, and I started writing a lot about family on Medium, and I force myself now to give myself a moment to text them and let them know, or to ask them, without kind of getting into details. Like that can be really problematic, and has been for me when I've included family on an online post and they were, sort of taken by surprise. So that's always important to be respectful to whoever you're including. And I know that's easier said than done sometimes. So.
Yeah, I think that's a great note, because I feel like, as writers, we're always like, yes, of course you've permission to write about whatever you want to. But then there is that, like, when it's actual people in your life involved, take a beat, let them know, reach out.
Yeah, I had an experience. So I used to do a one-man show years ago. It was like 10 years ago. And I had an experience where I sort of divulged a scene between me and my father, and he was, devastated that I would talk about it in public. And it was a hard lesson to learn. But like, I think you're right. Like as writers and creatives, we kind of believe generally like, well, it's your narrative, so you should write from as long as you write from your perspective. But I think you always have to balance that with like, what is the response going to be from people who you include, and are they going to be, happy about the details you put in or not? And that's important. So,
yeah. I love that. I appreciate your perspective so much, and your sensitivity about, and just what you're saying about, be honest, write from the heart, also still like, be a decent person. And I think that's a good.
That's hard because I fall on my face often, so it's good to hear.
Well, we think you're doing great.
Thank you.
And tell your parents we're so proud of you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to everyone who joined.
Thanks, everyone.
Let's see. Harris, what am I supposed to say? There'll be a post with the transcript of this eventually.
Yes.
Any other housekeeping that we have?
We'll share a link to the recording in Creators Hub as soon as it's ready within the next few weeks. And if you're interested, Amy and I lead a free open writing hour every Thursday through the end of March. So our next one is this Thursday. You can join that if you want, and there's more information on Creators Hub about that.
Yeah, so if I can really inspired you.
If I can jump in, check out juliovincent.com. That's my website. And you can link from there to not only Medium, but also to my classes and things like that. I really love what I do and connecting with people. And so I have an open writers pop-in, which happens once every 2 weeks on Friday, where writers from all over are welcome. I just post the Zoom link on my website every other Friday, and people are welcome to pop in and meet each other and talk, and have an open space to do that. So come on down.
Can Harris and I come crash?
Yeah, please.
Like, guess what? It's us again. Hey.
Does that mean I get the yellow background next time and you get the apartment background?
We'll think about it. I do like your gallery wall. All right. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for sharing so much of your story with us. And thank you all for being here.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you for being here.